Hey friend, welcome back to the channel. So webinars are one of the best ways to market an online course, but starting one can be absolutely overwhelming. There are so many things to manage and navigate and figure out. I have done over 70 live webinars, and we actually have 2 evergreen webinars since 2015 and a number of other live presentations as well. So I just wanted to share in this video 3 tips that I've learned along the way just to make your webinars a lot easier and a lot more manageable and a lot more enjoyable. Before jumping in, I'm just going to pop up a picture of myself from one of my first webinars. I remember being so anxious and overwhelmed, and obviously, like, looking at this photo, I didn't get a lot of memo on a lot of different stuff. Like, probably should have had better lighting, probably should not have worn a t-shirt, although I tend to wear t-shirts now anyway for video recordings. But I just remember being extremely nervous. And the first sort of tip that I can share with you is to bring help. Now, if you're like me and you have thought about doing a webinar, you've probably gotten worked up on some level of like, oh my gosh, how am I going to present? How am I going to see what people are talking about in chat? How am I going to chat with people while I present and not distract from the actual conversation and from the actual presentation? So the secret is actually to bring help. Help looks different for everyone. And so if you have a virtual assistant, it could be just having that virtual assistant join and be a part of that webinar. Now, if you don't have a virtual assistant yet, that's okay as well. You can simply ask a friend to come along and make them a co-host on your webinar. So ask them to basically manage the chat. So what does managing the chat look like? So one, they can rephrase key points in the chat. So this helps learners that learn through interaction. And this is just a little thing to notice. There are different types of learners, right? And so some people can be focused on a presentation and do perfectly well. Others want some sort of interaction. And so if you just always be aware to cater to those type of learners as well. Another way somebody that could be helping on the chat is just by asking open-ended questions. So as you're presenting the stuff, let's say that, I'm doing my podcasting webinar and, I just demonstrate, on the webinar, I demonstrate how to record a podcast. An open-ended question would be, what was something that you took away from the last video that Mel showed, or something like that, or the last demo that Mel showed. Basically, have them ask questions that start with a what or a how. The final thing a friend can help is just to engage with the attendees in the chat. It could be as simple as, commenting or liking or, asking a follow-up question, anything to keep the dialogue going. Because when we're doing these webinars, a lot of times I think as presenters, we think it's just about giving the presentation, but we're actually focusing on is creating a whole experience for folks. Now, the best case scenario when it comes to having somebody on the webinars helping you out is that attendees come alive, they get excited, they start to share with other people that are interested in the webinar. So you're creating this sort of flywheel effect for future signups and things like that. Now, the worst case is, let's imagine no one actually shows up on the webinar, which is actually what happened for my first couple. I was kind of by myself and recording stuff. So in that scenario, you have someone there that you can engage with, that you at least know one other person is there, and it just makes it more fun. Because ideally what you want to do is you want to create a recording of that webinar to send out. The second tip that I can share is to go deep versus wide. Now you might be wondering what I'm talking about, but most course creators get too scared about giving their best stuff away. They think, why would somebody buy my online course if I give all of my best stuff away? So what ends up happening is they hold back. And what I've actually found is the opposite to be true. When you give your best stuff away, you build trust, you build authority, you build this collective mindset, this abundance mindset among you and among your attendees. And so when they're ready to purchase your online course, they see you as someone that is very value driven, very centered, and very confident in what they know. And what I found over and over is it just leads to better sales. And that mindset also eventually lessens refund requests down the line. But there's a little bit of a secret to going deep versus wide. Most of us think that we have to cover a whole range of issues during our webinars. So whatever our online course is related to, we have to cover like all of the modules and, at least at a high level, like touch upon all of them. But what I've actually found is if you go deep in one, max 2 areas during your webinar versus trying to like shallow touch on everything, it's a smarter idea to go that 1 to 2 layers. I learned this the hard way. In the initial stages, I felt that pressure of like, okay, I got to teach all of the little facets to podcasting. So validating a podcast idea, doing the research, how do you record your first episode? How do you upload it? Like, how do you do all of this stuff? And what I actually found is that it left me overwhelmed because of the information I was sharing, and it actually surprisingly left attendees underwhelmed, meaning that because we were covering such a range of different things, they were like, well, you're not really going on deep on any of these. These are things that I could have just like picked up by watching a video or something. So I thought long and hard about for me, like with the show and tell, so I thought long and hard about something that I could show and tell, right? So when I am going deep and I'm thinking about my 1 to 2 things, I'm really thinking about how do I not just talk about it, but how do I demonstrate how to do something? So for example, instead of recommending a podcasting mic, demonstrate setting it up. So this is literally what we do on our podcasting workshop. I recorded a loom it was pre-recorded. The initial stages I did it live, but then later we pre-recorded it. And it was basically a 3-minute video just showing how to set up a podcasting mic. And after the attendees finished up the loom, I did some bonus tips and tricks that only you can learn from being in the arena. So it provided value because we had the video, but then once we got out of the video and the live demonstration, then I'm sharing more information. It did this interesting thing of like, wow, there's a great video here, and Mel's like providing a different level and a more depth of knowledge. And I don't know, for me, I found that this reduced value this provided value while reducing that information overwhelm that's so easy. The third and final tip I wanted to share is to create story loops. All of us as humans, we are wired for story, and incomplete stories cause tension and make us want to figure out like what exactly happened. Aim to create open and close interesting story loops all throughout your webinar. And this is like kind of maybe it's a dumb thing, but when I'm designing and thinking of webinars, what I will often do is grab either a post-it note or just like a 3x5 note card, and I will start to write down just 1 to 2 sentence stories or experiences from my own life that is related to that story. Another thing I do is I'll simply grab my phone and look through photos that I've taken, selfies, interesting photos that I've taken, and I'll think about how to weave those in. Now, you don't need 10 million stories. A couple of really effective stories that align with the teaching point can be just as powerful, if not even more. So an example of this was, and what's going to be interesting is as you get better and as you start to recognize that as you get to better at just creating these story loops, what you will notice is it'll come naturally to you. And in fact, in our podcasting workshop, I didn't even do this on purpose, but I created an accidental story loop. So basically what happened was we were going through the presentation, and there was like a section of the presentation and I had pre-recorded this, like this was when I had, created the evergreen webinar, and I forgot to grab something, to be completely honest, off of the bookshelf. And I just simply in the moment, I just said, hey, there's something that I want to show you a little bit later. that I don't normally show others because they just wouldn't be able to see it. But first check out this little thing that I'm going to show you, and then we'll come back and I'll show you. So you see how that creates a little bit of a story loop because people are like, what's that thing that Mel's going to go grab? I'm like really curious about it. So now I'm going to stick around and kind of see. So story loops, another way of thinking about it is how does it sort of push people forward to continue to watch the webinar? And now if you're kind of curious about what this exactly was, it was actually the sound file from my first ever podcast recording. Let me actually grab it right now while we're talking. All right, here we go. So what I essentially did is I just showed folks this like sound file, and it's a framed sound file of the very first recording of the Selling the podcast. I didn't know what I was doing with editing, so the WAV files are all like off, but I just thought it was like a beautiful thing. And it says Selling the Couch, Session 0, March 4, 2015, Big Dreams Start with Imperfect Steps. And that's what I showed the attendees on the webinar. And you know, the cool thing also with that, like related to this, if you can actually show like physical props, it's a great strategy as well, because most of these presentations are either PowerPoint slides or like talking headshots. And so if you can show these great visuals, like this is my first podcasting mic, this is the mic I used for 6 years, and if you can show little stuff like that, the added benefit of it is that it also creates a very human connection. So just to recap, number 1, bring help. Number 2, go deep versus wide. And number 3, create story loops. If you found this video helpful, I will also include another video right here, which is basically actually I think it's gonna be here. I'm still learning the whole YouTube thing, but it's basically going to be a 16 minutes of 8 years worth of course lessons that I've learned over the past 16 years. So if you're interested in that and want to check that out, you can find it right here. And we are a small, tiny, but mighty channel. So if you get a second and appreciated this video, would you take a moment to subscribe? Just hit that subscribe button, and it helps the YouTube algorithm, whatever that means. All right, have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.